taking control of your digital storage. This is MacVoices. Today's edition of MacVoices is supported by Truebill. Get control of your subscriptions at truebill.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it's been a while since we talked to a Take Control author. I'm expecting that we will be doing a lot more of this as we hear WWDC announcements and things actually start getting released. But that's then. This is now. This time we're going to talk to Mr. Jeff Carlson about an update to his Take Control of Digital Storage book from Take Control Books. Jeff, it's great to see you again. We haven't talked for a while.
It's been a while. I know. When we were corresponding, I noted that I feel like I've just had my head down for the last month or so. And then, we sort of release a project, pop the head up, and be like, oh, right, what else is going on? So it's a perfect time to get together and talk like this.
Definitely. And digital storage is something that every one of us deals with. I mean, some of the topics you and I talk about and the other Take Control authors talk about that maybe some folks can skip over because they don't use that program or they're not concerned about that particular issue. But this one is one that we all deal with every day on, especially our Macs.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, and I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but you wouldn't think that a book about storage would be interesting, and yet every time I go to revise it, there's something new and strange and interesting and sometimes difficult that someone might run into and not know where to go. Like as far as just operating your Mac, that's kind of one thing. And ideally, you don't have to think about all this stuff. But once you find yourself with a full hard disk, or you want to bring in an external drive, or you want to figure out what to use for, like longer term storage, or do you want to buy a network attached storage? And like these things kind of snowball. Okay, maybe there's something wrong with your disk. How do you go about using disk first aid? Well, it turns out that there are things under the hood that are a lot different in Monterey than they were in macOS Big Sur, than they were in, previous editions. And suddenly you hit that point where you're sort of overwhelmed. It's like, well, if I do this, am I going to break this? Or why is my in disk first aid, why is my central hard disk, my internal drive, why is that showing up as 3 different volumes and one of them is gray, and which one do I fix? And like it just leads to that sense of being overwhelmed and frustrated. And with Take Control, we want to avoid all that so that you have the answers in front of you. You don't have to get overwhelmed. You can say, you know what? Jeff has probably run into this because he wrote a big old stupid book about storage, and it's almost 200 pages. There's got to be something in here that addresses what I need. So that's the goal.
Well, and it's funny that you say that because sitting here listening to you talk about it, I'm kind of looking around my studio here and thinking, okay, let's see, we've gone from spinning disks to fusion disks or fusion drives to SSDs. Right. Now we have NVMe SSDs. You just brought up the network attached storage, NAS or NAS. So yeah, there are a lot of different, and I think I have examples of pretty much every one of those storage mediums around here somewhere. So yeah, and I bet folks, a lot of you have at least 2, maybe 3, maybe more of those. And we all just say, that's not terribly sexy. It just works. But as soon as you start having any kind of little issue, then you go running for something like Jeff's book to sort of figure out what you should do. This is 2.2, right? This is 2.2 version of the book.
2.2, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So I think the biggest change is just making sure that it's updated for macOS Monterey. As things change, we want to keep things up to date because, it turns out there were a few significant things in Monterey that change when it comes to storage. But it's funny because in some ways I find myself writing a buyer's guide because, okay, I'm going to take a step back. In the past, I would say in the recent past, if you needed to upgrade your storage in some way, let's say you have an external hard drive that's getting full, you would just go to Amazon or Newegg.com or someplace and say, all right, I have a 1 terabyte hard drive. I'm going to go buy a 4 terabyte hard drive. And it was a really easy decision. Maybe you would need to figure out, well, what speed is the hard drive? Is it a 7,200 RPM drive? This other one's really inexpensive, but it's 5,400 RPM, and maybe I need to do something that needs more performance. And so, you kind of get into some of those little rabbit holes. But in general, it's like, okay, I need a new drive. This one's bigger. I can afford it, and you order it. That's just not the case now, because now you have to ask yourself, okay, how much storage do I need? Should that storage even be on a traditional spinning drive? Even though I can get a lot of storage for my money, maybe I don't want to have to wait so long for things to copy. So maybe I want an SSD. Okay, well, there are a bunch of different options of SSDs that are external or that you could put into like a little, bare hard drive case. And maybe you want that to be, like a normal SSD, but maybe you want it to be the NVMe type of storage. And what should it be rated at? And then let's also throw in, what connector do you want for that? Should it be USB 4? Should it be Thunderbolt 3? Should it be Thunderbolt 4? What is Thunderbolt 4? Why are there 4 different kinds of USB 3.2 Gen 1 XQR? Again, like your brain is exploding because it's no longer easy to just go to the website and say, I want a bigger hard drive. You have to take all these other things into consideration, and you have to figure out, okay, if you're, say, doing some video editing, well, that's going to be a much bigger and a different conversation than if I just want to make sure that I have all my photos backed up somewhere. So I'm out of breath just talking about all this.
Yeah, honestly, I kind of skipped over the connector part, but you're absolutely right. You can spend a lot of money on a drive, but if you don't put it in the right box or get the right connection,
Right.
you're just wasting money because you're not getting the performance out of it that it is capable of.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there are also like little surprises. So, for example, I should probably triple check this before I say this, but as of today, the beginning of June, there's some issue with Apple's M1 Macs where even though they should be getting higher throughput through the USB-C ports, they're not. And so, you could go and spend a little bit of extra money because you want to get an external SSD that really has the best throughput. And it turns out that the computers won't actually support that. So maybe you could have saved yourself $100 to just use what it's capable of. Now that's something that hopefully will be fixed in a firmware update. Who knows? Like it's a known issue, and it seems odd that there is this limitation. But it's again one of those things that you run into that you may not have known, and so you spend $300 on an external SSD, and you're like, I'm going to get 2,000 megabits per second transfer speeds, and it's going to be wonderful. And then you realize, oh, this really isn't that much different than if I had bought this $200 one. So yeah, there's a lot to it.
Well, so you started out by saying, that the book was upgraded primarily from Monterey. And so can you give us some ideas of things that have changed under the hood from, let's see, what was it? Catalina. Catalina? Or no, Big Sur.
Catalina, then Big Sur, then.
So what has changed
I know.
in Monterey that because I guess my first thinking is that I don't remember being anything significantly different in Monterey, but maybe I haven't needed to fix anything or go under the hood.
Well, that's just it. So, on the surface level, storage-wise, I don't think there's really anything that has changed in terms of what most people will notice. It's just when you run into a problem. So, there are three things. I'll mention three things about it. So, just to provide a little bit of context, Macs are now run using the APFS, Apple File System protocol. Protocol's not the right word. File system, APFS file system, which is wrong to say. It's like saying a PIN number. But anyway, APFS is at the heart of your storage. That's what determines where all your files are going to be located, how the computer finds them, all of that. So it's like your base layer of how things work. Well, over time, Apple has been changing the way APFS works for your startup disk for security reasons. And so in macOS Big Sur, when you look at your desktop and you see your little Macintosh HD, like that's your hard drive, and you click it, you open it, it looks like one drive. Well, underneath, it's actually split out. So the system portion is on its own volume, and all your data is on another volume. And they did that for security purposes so that when some malicious app tries to gain access to the system, it can't do it because that system volume is locked. And that's very cool. Well, in Monterey, they've taken that a step further. And what happens is, and this sort of boggles my brain to think about, what must be involved to make this happen. But basically, your computer is actually not really running from its internal drive in the way that we would expect. So now macOS creates a snapshot, which is it's like a temporary copy of your system and is running the computer from that snapshot as another way of basically protecting your actual files so that bad actors can't go in and either add files when they shouldn't or change files when they shouldn't. Now, I realize that this is really in the weeds, but this comes into play where if you have something that's going wrong, like your computer seems like it's not keeping track of files or something, what you do is you go into Disk First Aid using the Disk Utility app, and you run Disk First Aid. Excuse me. Well, now when you look at it, your system shows up as like your system volume, and then you have your data volume, and then you have in gray this mounted snapshot volume. And so it's really easy to get confused as to like what's really running things. Now, so that's one aspect of it. Following on to that is actually a pretty huge deal, which is it's no longer easy. It's possible, but it's no longer easy to make a bootable copy of your system. And when it comes to troubleshooting, that becomes a very big deal. So before, what we would do is, this has been my advice for a long, long time. When you're making backups, you have like a time machine backup, and then you make a bootable duplicate, preferably on an SSD, just because it performs a lot faster. So let's say, something goes wrong with your computer, then you would just plug in that disk, say, I want to start up from the external drive and run my computer, and then that you can either, diagnose what's wrong or, copy off files and erase everything, but it means that you don't have to sort of wipe everything from ground zero, reinstall your system, and then build up, say, from a Time Machine backup, which takes a lot of time. Well, we can't do that anymore because of the way Apple implemented this system of running from a snapshot and having a protected system volume in deep down. And so what happens is apps like Carbon Copy Cloner and SuperDuper, they can make a bootable startup disk, but you have to jump through some hoops. And for example, you can make basically like a bootable duplicate that will run once that you can't update. It's kind of confusing. And so it's causing us to actually look at, well, do we really need a bootable duplicate anymore? And so that's like one thing that I address in the book is maybe we really don't. Like that was great in the past, but now it's so difficult that there are other ways to, start up your disk. Also included in the book, just by necessity, it now has the information on how do you start up and get to the macOS recovery portion, which is that little sort of secret volume that has all the tools that you need on M1 series Macs, which is different than what it used to be with the Intel series Macs. So, again, you think this is just a tiny change that's not going to affect anybody. And for the most part, I think that's true. But if you do run into a problem, you could get bit really fast. And there's even another thing that you can't really do anything about is if your M1 series Mac disk is damaged, like something physically is wrong with it, you cannot start your computer. Period. Full stop. You got to take it to Apple. And I don't know what they do to it, but there's these protections, which are great for security, ripple down into, okay, well, if you run into a problem, what are you going to do about it? So that's two things. And then the last thing I want to mention, which is actually a cool thing, which is so APFS, like I said, creates the snapshot of your system disk. And this is something that snapshots have been around basically since APFS came in, I want to say 3 revisions ago. And what your computer is doing, if you're not connected to a Time Machine disk, it's basically making little Time Machine backups every hour or so and storing on your internal drive, so that if you need to go back to something that got deleted, there's a version of that in your computer, depending on how much storage you have and stuff. Well, before, if you had to do anything with snapshots, you had to go to the terminal, and you had to, type in different, commands in order to either see your snapshots. Sometimes snapshots can get pretty big and take up a lot of space, and they, the way it's supposed to work is, as space is needed, they just get purged. Like the oldest one gets automatically deleted. But I've run into situations where that isn't necessarily the case, and the system reports that space as being free, but your installer might say, no, there's not enough room for me to install this new program. And there's a disconnect, and so we'd have to go in and remove some snapshots. Well, one great change, if you find yourself down this path, is in Disk Utility, you can actually see the snapshots. There's an interface for it, and you can select a snapshot and delete it from there. Again, tiny thing, but if you have followed that path, it's super helpful to know that it's there, and it's a lot easier than having to, honestly, the times that I've had to deal with snapshots, I've had to go find the PDF of my book and remember what the commands were because I knew that they were written there. I didn't have it in my head. So, not much changed.
Okay. This edition of MacVoices is supported by Truebill. Get control of your subscriptions at truebill.com/MacVoices. Over 80% of people have subscriptions they've forgotten about. Are you one of them? I bet you are. I know I am. How many subscription services are you paying for each month? Do you know? Subscriptions add up, and sometimes we don't notice the monthly deductions from our bank accounts or on our credit card statements. That's where Truebill comes in. With Truebill, you see all of your subscriptions in one place. You can keep the ones you want by doing nothing, and your Truebill concierge is there when you need them to cancel unwanted subscriptions, so you don't have to. No talking to humans, no difficult conversations, no one trying to talk you out of canceling. Matthew B. said, "In a matter of seconds, I saved $660 for the year on my DirecTV bill, saved $120 for the year on my Sirius XM bill, saved $840 a year on my car insurance." Those are exactly the kind of subscriptions the Truebill can help you with. Start canceling your unused subscriptions today at truebill.com/MacVoices. Go right now, truebill.com/MacVoices. It could save you thousands a year. truebill.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Truebill for their support of MacVoices. So I'd love to go through each chapter of the book in detail, but
I was going to say, I totally overloaded you. I'm sorry.
no. I mean, we could overload by going through the every chapter of the book, and we'd be here till next week.
Yeah.
Because I just learned something. Because I've seen that, and I don't think it really registered with me as to what was happening and why. I have to ask this question because it's the first thing that comes to my mind. So if my computer is running off of a snapshot, which I assume is not necessarily in RAM, it's loaded somewhere on my disk, whether that's an SSD or almost certainly is an SSD. Then what happens when I install a new application with preferences? I understand that the application probably goes, over here, but most things, or if you start up a new app, it writes certain things into our system files, places that we may go, but we shouldn't, or unless we really know what we're doing. So then how is the snapshot that it's running, is it running from basically a copy of the most recent snapshot so that what I've installed, the information and data pieces are preserved on that? Is that how it's working?
Sort of. So it's creating a separate snapshot for the system. That's different from the time machine local snapshots that are being created like every hour. And in terms of like when you add a new application, this is where I get to say I'm not a developer, and so magic happens, and so the system. The system basically, you'll install something and you have to give it permission as an administrator to install it. And what I believe happens is basically, that new application gets stored in the applications folder in a way such that the next time you restart your machine, then it creates a new snapshot with that in place. So, I'm not sure the exact technical how of that, but there are ways that it references things securely so that, you don't have to say install an application and restart your computer every time, which I believe we had to do in the ancient dark ages, something like that. But yeah. So magic happens, and it's just the way macOS is moving data around and referring to files.
Now, based on what we just talked about, I want to make sure that I'm correct in saying to our viewers and listeners that what Jeff is saying about Time Machine and that every hour thing is not a reason for you not to have an adequate backup strategy. This is not a backup strategy. This is a break the glass kind of thing if something really goes wrong. But you still want to have, even if you can't boot from it, I would think under a worst case scenario, if you've created a super duper copy or a carbon copy cloner copy, that if I had to reinstall the operating system and then migrate everything back over from that drive, that I could do that. It would take a little bit longer, but I would get everything back. But even that is still not a reason not to have that extra backup strategy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, what I love about the time machine snapshots is that, and I say this because I have a laptop. Right now, I am basically in the studio of my house, which is our guest room that I've commandeered part of, to be able to do podcasts and things. But my actual office is upstairs, and that's where my time machine disk is that I connect when I'm working upstairs. So when I'm not connected to that, the time machine snapshots are going to be storing versions of my files. Let's say I'm writing an article and I've been here for, I don't know, all day. So let's say 5 or 6 hours. And if I, delete that article file and I empty the trash because I'm reckless and I'm not paying attention, then I could find myself out of luck because I haven't connected to my time machine disk, right? Well, because of these snapshots, I know that there is a version of that file from this morning at, 10 o'clock or so, that I can still recover that, even though I have not yet connected to time machine. So it's like a little, it's like a temporary rolling backup. And then once you do connect to the time machine, it updates the state of where your disk is at that point and cleans out it, copies over the different versions from the snapshots and then clears the snapshots so that they aren't taking up any space. So this is a great thing if you're traveling, especially if, again, you have plenty of space on your computer, because it will, store some of these things that you may not get back to your computer for a week or something. And so again, like, it's additional peace of mind. You should absolutely be making backups. And honestly, if you're traveling for more than a week, I bring a little, portable SSD that I have a carbon copy cloner script that I can run that does make a duplicate of my information. So I have, an extra right there, even traveling with me, because it's just, it's only about this big.
Okay, so once again, I'm hearing things that I think maybe we need to focus on a little bit. That I think Time Machine has had kind of a rough reputation. It makes sense; it's a good thing, but I personally know a number of people that don't have it implemented. They certainly do not have a dedicated Time Machine disk. And so I'm wondering, are these changes, do they suddenly make having a time machine disk a whole lot more important than they've ever been before?
That's a good question.
That's why I'm the host, Jeff.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, so if you've never used Time Machine, basically, I think what will happen is you'll get these snapshots stored on your disk, but they will roll off and no longer be available on a much shorter time window. So I can connect to my Time Machine disk and know that I can go back several months or something and get a file that I may have deleted weeks ago. With local snapshots, maybe a file that I had last week is no longer available. So, it's, to me, as someone who likes to have backups and relies on backups, that's kind of playing with fire. And I would say, especially given the fact that you can get like a little Samsung or a SanDisk, little SSDs. I mean, you can get a 500 gig SSD for under $100 now. Let's say your internal drive is 500 gigs. Get maybe a 1 terabyte disk 1 terabyte SSD and set that up as your time machine disk, it's going to happen quickly. It's not that big of an issue. My time machine disk is actually a 5 terabyte traditional disk, so it's just a little USB powered, but it's a spinning disk. Because I wanted to have plenty of storage on it, and because it's time machine, I don't care about performance. I just want to make sure that it's doing its regular backups when I'm connected. And even that was, I don't remember. I'd have to go look it up. But you can get several terabytes for maybe $100, $150, and it's just a little tiny USB powered thing. You don't have to deal with the big disks with their big power supplies anymore. So yes, it means spending more money, but it's a relatively small amount of money for the peace of mind that any sort of backup will give you.
And that comment comes up so often, and I constantly am asking people, what is your data worth, and what is your time worth? And somewhere between those two, you should be able to come up with a calculus that says this is or is not worth it. I mean, maybe it's not worth it for you, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But if somebody comes in, I mean, basically what we're talking about potentially is somebody comes in and takes your computer off your desk and disappears forever. Is that going to mm-hmm. materially impact you? If the answer is no, then don't worry too much about some of this stuff. But I kind of don't think that I know very many people who could make that statement.
Yeah. Well, and we have the advantages of having, different, cloud storage stuff, which is another topic that's addressed in the book. Like all of my work files, I still use Dropbox. And so all of my work files are synchronized to a Dropbox. So, I'm not concerned really that I'm going to lose any data. But if my laptop were to just stop working, or I drop it, or I'm in a hotel room and it gets stolen somehow, I'm not concerned that I'm going to lose any data, but I'm definitely going to lose time, and it's going to take time to get a new computer or get it repaired. Maybe the laptop has to just go into Apple, and even though when I've had repairs done through Apple, it's usually a pretty quick turnaround. But that's still 2 or 3 days when maybe you don't have anything else to use and you're just adrift, or you have to. I know one speaker at a conference that I was at recently needed to buy a new computer, and the MacBook that she ordered just wasn't going to arrive in time. So she went and she bought a MacBook Pro, and basically used it. Her new one came, and then she returned the one that she bought, in the return window. And like that is an option. That was an option for her. It's not an option for everybody. But how long is it going to take for you to get back on your feet? Maybe the stuff that you're doing isn't that big of a deal, and you can just call it a little, computer vacation. But for a lot of us, being without a computer for a day, 2 days, 4 days, that can make a big difference in the stuff that we need to get done and need to find, alternate devices to use, or maybe you can do it all on your iPad. All of those kind of things where suddenly, your brain was focused on, all right, I have a task and I need to finish this task. And now suddenly there's this massive problem in the way, which is I can't do this task, and now what? And now how many hours am I going to spend trying to, rebuild my data? And, it ripples. And so as much as possible, we want to reduce the amount of ripples. We want to reduce the amount of time that's going to be consumed just dealing with the problem. And so knowing a bit of how these things are working and having some preparation in place, having some backups in place really goes a long way. And suddenly that $100, $150 that you spent on a backup drive is more than worth it.
Agreed. To wrap this up, I want to take us back to sort of where one of the places we started. because you just mentioned about something, a laptop getting stolen from your hotel room. These most of these changes also, I mean, they definitely enhance the reliability, and since we've been talking backups, but they also are driven by security and making sure that someone who does steal that laptop, okay, they've got your laptop, but they really can't get into your files. It's becoming more and more difficult to get into your files, which is something that I know things I have on my laptop. I don't want anyone getting into them except me. And so that's a good thing. So if this seems maybe in places a little inconvenient, it sounds like it's probably worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always like that cost benefit analysis. Oh, geez, I sound like I work in a real job. It's that. Sorry, risk analysis is probably the better way to put it. And we all want to think that we're not going to run into any problems. And quite honestly, this is going to sound like hyperbole, but for the most part, owning Macs and the high quality of how they're built, for the most part, we don't run into problems. It's just when we do, sometimes they can be bigger than we think. And again, like, you don't want to put yourself in that situation. And you don't want to put yourself in a situation where suddenly you have to become an expert on Apple file systems and where the system is storing things on disk and how to extract it, or even things like let's say you have an external disk and suddenly it's making a weird noise, or it's starting to copy much slower. Well, there are ways that you can look and check and see that actually that may be a failing drive. I'm realizing this now early, so I can replace it and move everything onto a newer drive before catastrophe happens.
And unfortunately, those catastrophes sometimes do genuinely happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the book is Take Control of Your Digital Storage. I lost my page here. Your digital storage. It's TakeControlBooks.com, of course, is where you go to get this and all of Jeff's other Take Control books and all the other books from all the other great authors. Jeff, do you know what the price is on this? I know you said it was about 200 pages.
Yeah, it's about 200, like 193 pages, I want to say. The book is $14.99, and if you have a previous version of it, you should have gotten an email from Take Control that, depending on which version and when you bought it, et cetera, would have a discounted rate. So look for that email or contact Take Control and see, or log in to takecontrolbooks.com, and I think it will then tell you if you can get it for a $5 upgrade or something.
Great. Hey, thanks so much. It's always a pleasure, and I'm going to say thank you on behalf of a lot of folks for writing this book, because there's so many things here that it would be very easy to overlook, and hopefully maybe you'll never have to deal with them. But if you do, you either want to know how to deal with it or know where to go to get information on how to deal with it. And that would be Jeff's book. Jeff, I guess we'll see you again next time.
Next time. Sounds great. Thanks for having me on.
That's good. Thank you very much. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. Hopefully you've learned a few things about what's going on under the hood on your Mac in Monterey. I know I have. I think I will be changing my behavior and maybe re-looking at my time machine strategy because I didn't realize that it was quite this integrated into some of the improvements in Monterey. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching.
Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. you will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.